No, it must be because of your posture. It must be because you're out of alignment. It must be because one leg is shorter than the other. You're oversimplifying pain because, as we've seen in these videos, pain can be quite complex. And a lot of our pain levels and our perception of what's going on with our body actually happens in the brain, not at the tissue level. Welcome to the Build Beyond podcast. This episode is going to be about pain. I talk about pain a lot. I don't have a lot of time in clinic to discuss pain with patients. That might seem a little odd because I spend an hour with my patients, but we have a lot to do in that hour. And there isn't usually time to go into any kind of in-depth explanation talking about pain. Plus, a lot of people don't want to hear about it. It's kind of boring. You get into neuroscience a little bit and I kind of start to lose people. But this is a good episode for someone if you have been in pain or you've been struggling with an injury, you've tried different things and you don't understand why. Maybe you don't understand your pain at all and you want more information. So if you want more information, I'm about to give it to you. But I'm going to show you some videos, or if you're listening, you're going to listen to some audio that's not me, some stuff that I've collected that I think does a really good job of explaining pain and helping people understand why they feel certain things and what those things mean. And let me give you an example before I go to the videos. Okay, so we've all probably used Icy Hot or Bengay or some type of menthol cream. If you haven't, go down to Walgreens, try it out. When you put on Icy Hot, it feels both cold and hot at the same time. Now, no one's under any misconception that the tube contains two different types of cream, one that's hot and one that's cold. We know that it's not a temperature thing. It's some type of chemical reaction that gives us that type of sensation and ultimately helps with sore muscles or sore joints. We understand that, so we react in a very specific way when we use it. It's not too exciting. It just kind of helps you get through some aches and pains. Now, in the unrealistic scenario where we had a time machine, if we went back in time, let's say 500 years, to a part of the world where people didn't understand that, one, they might think you're a witch. Like if you imagine just bringing for whatever reason, you brought the Icy Hot bag with you, you had someone close their eyes and you put it on their arm, they wouldn't understand it. Now, if you think about the cellular and maybe the tissue reaction that we would have if we put Icy Hot on ourselves now in 2025, that tissue reaction would be the same as if someone used it 500 years ago. So there's no difference in what's going on in the body, but the reaction is going to be very different based on the understanding and the perception of what that sensation means. And I think that's the big problem with people who are struggling with chronic pain or a long-term injury is the perception of pain does not always match what's going on with the tissues and what's happening in the body. Another really good example that we could use from our time now in 2025, because we have imaging, I'm going to explain arthritis to you in two different ways. Both ways are accurate, but each way is going to elicit a different response from a patient, especially if this is their only explanation of arthritis. So let's say you go into the clinic and you get your knee x-rayed and someone says, oh man, let's look at this image. And we look at it and they say, look, the joint space is narrowing. It's getting a lot closer together. The bone's thickening and you're almost bone on bone. Ooh, that sounds bad. And they say, look at these little bony outcroppings. We call these bone spurs. You're developing bone spurs. Oh man, that sounds bad. And then they say, yeah, you're getting to the point where you might have degenerative joint disease and you might need to get this joint replaced at some point. Well, that sounds terrible. So now you've got this knee pain. Someone just told you have a disease. That sounds bad. Someone just told you you're bone on bone. So the vision is in your head is that if this gets worse, my bone's going to grind on each other. And they use this term bone spurs. So you've got this sharp pain. Maybe the bone spurs are shredding the tissues. Maybe that's what's going on. This sounds terrible. I'm going to react in a very specific way because this is freaking me out. Now, let me describe this in a different way. You were looking at your x-ray and I say you have some joint space narrowing that is probably normal. Lots of people have this. A lot of people have worse than this and they don't have any pain. So we can't necessarily correlate the loss of joint space with pain. You've got some other changes that we see that are usually quite normal with age and with activity. And this seems like something we can manage. with conservative care. I don't see any reason for an orthopedic referral at this point. Boom. Okay, two very different explanations, and both of them probably technically accurate depending on what imaging we're looking at or how the knee actually looks. But let's say they're both accurate, but they're both going to elicit a different response because they give you a different understanding of what is actually happening. So it's a different explanation, just like the icy hot explanation. So I'm going to play a video for you right now. This is about a 9-minute video or 9-minute audio if you're listening. This is from a TED Talk from a neuroscientist. I love this video though, because this is about as interesting as I can make neuroscience for you, because he explains it in layman's terms to the best of his ability, and he is a very entertaining presenter. All right, have a listen.
Let me tell you how I think pain works. To do that, I'm going to tell you a story. About 10 years ago, or 15 years ago now, So let me tell you how I think pain works. To do that, I'm going to tell you a story. About 10 years ago, or 15 years ago now, I was camping in the bush, and I left the tent very early in the morning, beginning of the day, beautiful time of day, and this happened. Now, I'm going to do that again in case you missed it. This is critical to the story. Now, I'm going to tell you biologically what happened just then with that thing. Something touched me in the outside of my left leg in the skin, and that activates touch detectors. There's receptors all over our bodies, lots of different types of receptors respond to different things, and they get excited by that event, and they send a message straight up my leg, zing! They're like Ferrari fibers, really, really fast conducting nerve fibers. Straight into my spinal cord, straight up my spinal cord, across these things here called pyramidal things, right up to this part of my brain here. And the message is, you've just been touched on the outside of your left leg in the skin. They're really fast. And the message gets there really quickly. Meanwhile, whatever happened was sufficiently dangerous to activate danger detectors. We call them nociceptors. Noci means danger, ceptor means receptor, so they're danger receptors. I call them danger detectors. These danger detectors are slow conducting neurons. They're very thin. They send a message that slowly comes up my leg now. It's actually very fast, obviously, but much slower than the other touch detectors. Up my leg, into my spinal cord, and that's as far as the message gets, because those neurons release chemicals. They're called neurotransmitters into the space. And those neurotransmitters are effectively saying there's danger on the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. They're very friendly detectors, very friendly nociceptors. That activates another neuron. There's another neuron sitting there in the spinal cord, deep inside your spinal cord, which gets excited by those neurotransmitters. And that neuron we could call a danger messenger nerve. And the danger messenger nerve takes a message up into the thalamus, which sits at the bottom of the brain, and says to the thalamus, thalamus, there's danger in the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. And the thalamus, it's like a relay station processing all sorts of things. Says to the brain, well, nothing else is very interesting right now. Brain, there's danger in the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. And then the brain has to evaluate what is going on. What's the true danger level here? Ask the visual system. The visual system says, well, you are in the bush. I can see trees and shrubs. And my motor system says, I'm a commander, and I'm commanding walking, and you are walking. And this part of the brain here is called the posterior parietal cortex. This part of the brain here puts all the senses together, and it concludes, okay, you are halfway through swinging your leg through. This event is happening that far above the ground, that far above your ankle, in the skin. And then we ask the frontal lobe, have we been here before? And the frontal lobe says, Yes, we have. We've been here so many times. I know exactly what this is. And the only way I make sense of my situation was that my frontal lobe concluded, this is not dangerous. We've been here so many times. Why don't we create enough pain to kick off the twig and keep walking? And that's what happened. I had this scratchy pain, didn't think much about it, kept walking, took off my sarong, shelter your eyes, jumped in the river, got out, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up sometime later having been bitten by an eastern brown snake. Australia's deadliest, second deadliest, I have to accept, second deadliest land snake. That was a situation where I was in massive danger, and the danger messages were screaming from my leg, and my brain, weighing up everything, decides, no, this is not dangerous. So I had no pain coming from anywhere. It's up to the brain to produce pain. I want you now to fast forward maybe a year. I can't remember how long it was, but again, I was walking in the bush, walking along in the bush, nothing going on. Oh, yo! Now, I can't really do that very well. I always feel self-conscious making a loud noise. But I'll tell you what happened biologically. Something touched me in the outside of my left leg in the skin. Now, we have touch receptors, all different types, all over our body, in the skin, inside our body. They get activated by that, and they were activated in this situation. Sends a message up my leg, zing, really fast, Ferrari fibers, straight into my spinal cord, up my spinal cord, across those pyramidal things, up into this part of my brain, and says to this part of my brain, you've just been touched on the outside of your left leg in the skin. Very fast fibers. Meanwhile, that event, whatever that event was enough to activate danger detectors. We call them nociceptors. Noci, danger, septor, receptor, danger receptor. I call them danger detectors. They were activated by this event. And that sends a message. They're slow conducting, relatively slow to the touch ones. Sends a message up into the spinal cord as far as it gets and releases neurotransmitters, little chemicals. And those neurotransmitters are effectively saying, there's danger on the outside of your left leg in the skin. Yes! Well done. Well done. Friendly. These things are very friendly. And there's a neuron right there in the spinal cord that gets excited by those neurotransmitters, by that message. And that neuron sends a message up into the bottom of the brain, a place called the thalamus, and says to the thalamus, thalamus, there's danger in the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. And then the thalamus is like a relay station and says to the brain, oh, there's something interesting, brain. There's danger on the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. And then the brain has to work out, well, how dangerous is this really? And that's when the groovy stuff happens. Visual system says, okay, you are in the bush. I can see trees and shrubs and things like that. The sensory cortex, this part of the brain's already received a touch message. And it says, well, I can tell you something's happening this far above your ankle. The posterior parietal cortex up here, which puts everything together, says, okay, you are halfway through swing phase, bringing your leg through. We know the motor system is commanding walking. This event is happening that far above the ground, that far above your ankle, on the outside of your left leg in the skin. And then we ask the frontal cortex, anything from our history we should know about here? And the frontal cortex is waiting because it knows 9 months ago, a year ago, you were in exactly this situation and you almost died. The thing we have to do as a brain is protect you. And bang, into my consciousness was this severe pain on the outside of my left leg in the skin. Really hurt, threw me off the path. What seemed like minutes was probably, 10 seconds or something. Someone had a good look at my leg and there's a scratch from a twig. It's not a very dangerous situation. In that situation, low danger, massive pain, because the brain had good evidence that I needed to be protected. And that's the thing with pain. Pain depends on protection index, not true danger index, because it's up to the brain to decide. First scenario, massive danger, snake bite, Brain decides, no, this is safe, not much pain. Second scenario, tiny danger, scratch from a twig, but brain decides with good reason, high danger, massive need to protect, so massive pain. That's how I think pain works.
That's a good video, isn't it? I don't think I could explain it better than he can. And I think the ending really ties it together. He had an experience with in a familiar environment where it was life-threatening, but he didn't perceive it to be life-threatening, so he didn't have pain immediately. Then he had an experience in a scenario that was definitely not life-threatening, but because of the context, because he had been bitten by a snake before in that scenario, he went back and he experienced that same level of pain that he had had previously, even though he didn't have tissue damage that matched that level of pain currently. Now I'm going to share another video with you, and it's going to give you another really good example of how pain can be misleading.
A guy fell off a ladder, I think it was somewhere in the UK, and a 15-centimeter nail went through his boot, writhing in pain. They had to put him on morphine just to get him to calm down. Brought him into the x-ray. They x-rayed the boot. Went right between his toes.
No shit.
Went right between his toes. Didn't puncture his foot at all. They needed to sedate this guy because of the pain he was the pain that he was perceiving.
Because of what he thought happened.
Because of what he thought happened.
That is bananas.
Oh yeah, well documented. So here, what do we have so far? We have pain in the presence of no tissue damage.
Didn't even cut him. Nothing.
Another great example. So keep in mind, in the first video, the guy at the end of the video, he had a very intense pain reaction based on an injury that he had had before. So he was in a similar scenario, and his brain remembered the injury, it remembered the previous pain. So it basically recreated that pain experience for him, even though there wasn't a snake bite. In this scenario, it's super interesting because presumably this guy's never had a nail through his foot before. So his brain actually created a pain scenario because he's never had this experience. And he created this pain scenario, what it thought would be an appropriate level of pain for a nail through your foot. Now let's bring it back and let's go over why this matters again. Because if we just go off of things like imaging and we just try and narrow it down and we say, okay, well, what's the root cause of my pain? And we look at an image, we look at an X-ray or an MRI, we're only going to see a snapshot in time of a structure. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's causing your pain. So there are a lot of people who have, if we found 10,000 people who had no spine pain and we x-rayed all of them, we're going to find a lot of wonky things with their spines. A lot of things you think, wow, that probably should cause pain, but it doesn't. The same thing, if you go out and you find 10,000 people with spine pain, a certain number of them are not going to have any findings on their x-rays. That happens a lot to people where they go in and they get some imaging and the imaging is unremarkable. There's nothing in the imaging that would describe or explain why they have pain. So imaging might show you something, but it also might show you something that is not actually a pain generator. So we can't just boil it down to image findings necessarily. Now, if you've got pain in your leg and you go and you have a shattered bone, that's probably why. So in some extreme cases, I get it. But for a lot of different people that in a lot of different scenarios, it's not going to give you the whole picture. Focusing on things like leg length discrepancies, that's another interesting one that we talk about. I think historically chiropractors have used a lot. They say, oh, look at the difference in your leg length. I'll link a paper in the description of this. Having uneven legs is actually pretty common. So correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. So if most people have some level of unevenness in their legs, but not everyone has the same pain, we can't really say that it's the uneven legs are necessarily causing the pain. It's just, you're just taking something that's pretty common and you're just attaching it to the pain level. We don't know if that's what's causing it. That would be like me walking in and saying I have face pain and someone's like, oh, you have a beard, so the beard must be causing the face pain. It's a guess. It doesn't necessarily mean that those two are related. Another thing we can think about is when we focus on things like posture. If you sit with your head forward and hunched over like this, and you have back pain or neck pain, could that posture be contributing? Yeah, it probably could be. Is it the singular root cause? No, a lot of people sit like that and don't have pain, and a lot of people try and sit upright, and it actually causes more pain than slouching forward. So you can't necessarily tie a specific posture to a specific amount of pain or joint that's going to give you pain. Another thing is talking about biomechanics. So if someone's got, let's say, hip pain, and you watch them walk and their gait looks weird, you might say, oh, it's because you're walking funny, but realistically, they've taken how many millions of steps in their life in that same pattern? Is it something you can actually change? I would say probably not. Even if it is causing pain or contributing to pain, is it the only thing that's causing pain, or is it really that root cause? Maybe, maybe not. But this is similar to hyperfocusing. It's similar to talking about icy hot and saying, well, you've got the sensation of hot and cold, therefore it must be this explanation. The tube must contain both hot and cold. No, there's a more detailed explanation that has to do with a chemical reaction. And it's the same thing like the example that I gave with arthritis. You can't really necessarily boil pain down to a very specific thing, because you feel sensations in the tissue, but the interpretation actually happens in the brain, like the first video that we watched talked about. So there's that post hoc fallacy where someone has pain, so they look at the thing that happened right before it, and therefore that thing must have caused the pain. So now you might be thinking, okay, this is me. I've had chronic pain and I've had injuries, and someone's told me that my spine's out of alignment and that my hips are out of alignment because I have one leg shorter than the other. And someone has shown me x-rays, and they've used the term bone spurs, and they've used the term bone on bone. And so you may be sitting there thinking that I am describing you, and then you're asking, well, what could I do next? I want to play another video for you. It's not one of my videos, but I think this is a really good one to give you a general idea of something you could do.
When we're helping people manage complex pain, persistent pain, injury, trauma, it's existential. That really changes our approach. So much of what we try to do in these times is say, hey, look, how are we going to shift a whole host of behaviors back to you? How do we restore your agency? How do we shift loci of control back to you? A lot of what we do is say, hey, look, we're going to have to become specialists in some of the underlying physiology. That means we're going to need you to max out your ability to get as good sleep as you can. How can we maximize all the micronutrients, give you some control? Hey, maybe this is a time to change body composition. Maybe this is time to recomp. How can we work on a breath practice, stress reduction? How do we keep you plugged into your training community? How do we think about keeping you being a human being while we untangle these things? The other thing that we're working on is saying, hey, what are all the tools available to us to help you manage your symptoms, even temporarily? Does that mean it's compression? Is it using some NMES device like the H-Wave, where we can get some temporary on-demand pain relief that's drug-free? All of those things are on board. And really what we're trying to do is say, hey, look, you can feel helpless, it can feel overwhelming and certainly out of control, but there's a lot of things that we can do to help you be able to manage this and feel like you have some agency and control again. And that is the first step when we start to untangle what feels like a daunting, massive issue.
And I think I'm going to leave you with that video. What I really like about that is the idea that first and foremost, we need to give people agency. We need to give you control. We need to give you confidence. There has to be something that we can do and that you can do to help you make yourself feel better. Because guess what? If we image your spine and it looks a certain way, we're probably not going to change that structure, not without surgery or bracing. And if you look at imaging, you look at an x-ray and you've got some arthritic changes, guess what? That's probably not going to get any better. And if you have one leg that's shorter than the other, guess what? You were probably born that way and you probably walked that way. So unless it's a significant difference, you're probably not going to be able to change it. And it's probably not going to have that much effect on you. Your posture might be a contributor, it might not be. I don't think it's as common as most people think. But if you have to sit a lot, how are we going to change that? Well, probably not going to change a whole lot about it. But with all of these things, what could we change? Well, there are lifestyle modifications that we can change. If you sit a lot, maybe we can find creative ways to help you stand up and get out of that seated flexion posture. That's within your control. Maybe we can add in more steps per day because that's going to improve your health, and it's going to have a lot of different benefits for things like arthritis, for things like posture, heart health, all different kinds of things. And you're going to be increasing physical activity, so you're going to get a lot of benefits from that. There are other tools that you can use. I talked about Icy Hot. Icy Hot works quite well. Stretching works well. There are different machines if you want to invest in them, or if you can find a provider that uses things like eStim, and he talked about some different things there. We can talk about nutrition. I think that's really important. We can talk about sleep. All of these things are components of a comprehensive health plan that we could use, we don't necessarily have to use, that's going to help address your comprehensive problem of this chronic pain or this long-term injury. And I think the problem is oversimplifying it. The problem is ignoring the fact that pain science exists and that pain is complicated, and looking for that root cause, and for people trying to sell that root cause as if pain is so simple they have the fix for it. I just don't think that's true. It's not something I've seen in my experience as a healthcare provider, and I haven't seen any research or any evidence to support anything like that. So in reality, pain is complex. Pain has a lot to do with what's going on in the tissues, but it has also a lot to do with what's going on in the brain and what's going on with your perception and your understanding. And you do have a lot that you can do about it, even if it's chronic pain, even if it's relatively serious. So I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will catch you guys soon.